first off, since this is happy hour, I do want to mention that I've opted for a gin and tonic today. But the gin is one of my favorite gins. It's this, is it overexposing? It's overexposing. Here we go. Bar Hill. It's made from honey, or at least that's an ingredient. And it's pretty outstanding. It's a very sweet, mellow taste, without being super sweet. I mean, it is a dry gin after all. But cheers. Thanks for showing up on this Friday, April 10th. Last week I forgot to say the date, and we do need to keep track of these things since, is it just me, or is time just passing really fast with all of us in isolation? Raise your hand if it feels like the weeks have just been flying by. I don't know what it is. I feel like I've been busier than ever, strangely. But then again, I've always worked from home, so it's not like things are a real big difference for me. So first off, I want to thank Blackmagic Design, because Blackmagic Design is sponsoring this whole series. They're helping me pay the Zoom bills. So thank you to them. If you haven't already given DaVinci Resolve a try, you should. Granted, I'm biased because I help work on the product. But we're all very proud of it, and I think it solves a lot of problems. But they also make great hardware. They make great cameras. They just introduced this ATEM Mini Pro, which is the bee's knees for people doing webinars and stuff. So they really have their finger on the pulse. It's pretty outstanding. I also want to give out a shout out to Flanders Scientific. They're not sponsoring this series, but I just want to give you all a reminder. If you're working at home and you need a color critical monitor at home and you haven't already set yourself up with one, and you're just a solo operator and you don't have a lot of money, give them a call. They are offering discounts to folks in need. So give them a call. And then lastly, once again, I want to thank Gaia the producer of the last project I directed in China, Carry My Heart to the Yellow River, for allowing me to use that footage for some of these demos. I have a really interesting and varied collection of questions today, and I've been encouraging people who ask questions to go ahead and show up so that we can have a conversation. But I'll probably drag some volunteers into some of these conversations just to get some more perspectives. It worked really well last time. I want to see who else we can bring into the conversation this week. So last thing before I launch into questions is I'm going over to my website, vanhurkman.com, because I want to point out you only have to sign up for this webinar series once, and you can keep using that link to come on back over and over and over for the 8 episodes we're doing. But if you want to ask a question and you've already signed up, go to vanhurkman.com, and there's a pinned article right at the top. Join me for a happy hour Q&A. And if you open that article up, there's a form which lets you ask me more questions. This thing is only going to be as interesting as the questions I get. So please ask a question, show up, and we can have a conversation about it. All that said, I actually had my hands full prepping the things that I wanted to show today. And that caused me to be a little later than I ordinarily like to be. But I'm going to start with, is Itai Levin there? Itai Levin. Okay. I am not seeing him here, but he has a really good question, so I'm going to start out with that one. And actually, to bring into this conversation, raise your hand if you regularly deal with bringing AAFs from Avid into DaVinci Resolve. Raise your hand if that's something you do regularly. Okay. So I'm going to grab Jason Bowdach. Hey, Jason,
Hey,
can you hear me?
I can
Hey,
I can hear you.
hey. So, so this is something you do regularly. Actually, I'll start the ball off by asking you, um, of all of your clients, and I know that. Well, first, tell me a little bit about your clientele. You're a solo operator, right? You have your own shop.
So I am a solo operator, yes, and I do have my own shop. 1 second.
Hello.
Sorry, for 1 second. I had to mute the TV in the background.
Oh,
A lot of things
you
going on.
wanted to sound professional,
We want
right?
to have mildly professional. So I do run my own shop.
Oh no, nobody's professional here. This is all we're just making this up. So I've been a solo indie operator for most of my career, uh, and I my experience has typically been like back when I was doing tons and tons of color correction. I was getting lots of Final Cut Pro Classic projects all the time. And then things shifted in my world to Premiere Pro. So I don't actually get hardly any AAFs from Media Composer. Everything I know about how DaVinci Resolve deals with AAFs from Media Composer, I know from writing the manual. And oftentimes that's an advantage because I know little tips and tricks that some people who didn't read the manual wouldn't. Other times it's a disadvantage because, as we all know, in the real world, things don't always work as smoothly as we would like them to. So let me ask you, what percentage of your clientele gives you AAFs versus everything else that they could be giving you?
I would say it's gotten less and less more recently. I'm getting a lot more people giving me projects that are Premiere based and Final Cut 10, especially. My clientele is a lot of independent filmmakers, people that are prepping things for festivals and stuff like that. So it's not people that are working things in broadcast and things that are sending things to streaming and that nature quite yet. So it's a very Premiere and Final Cut 10 heavy workflow. But I have noticed that the Avid people are moving over to things like DaVinci Resolve. They're experimenting with things like Final Cut 10 and Premiere much more. But I still do receive a lot of Avid workflows because people tend to want to learn Avid because they want to get into broadcast. And LA is a very heavy broadcast market. And if you do want to work at something on a Netflix show or you want to work on something for NBC or Fox or CBS, and these big broadcasts, they are cut on Avid, and it is an Avid workflow, and it's a very important application to know. So if you are an independent filmmaker that wants to eventually transition, I found that's still an important workflow, one, to understand, because it is a great thing to know if you want to transition to an assisted editing workflow, for instance. Um, but I have noticed that a lot of people are still transitioning if to Final Cut 10 and to Premiere, mainly for the full feature ends. So I think it's probably limited to my area, one, but two, I think it's more of a side thing that a lot of filmmakers want to just have that as a side craft and they want to keep that up as well. And maybe they're doing it as a side gig also to just keep that skill up as well.
Sure, sure. Well, getting to the question at hand and
Mhm.
the actual nuts and bolts of dealing with AAFs. I'm curious about the AAFs that you do receive. Do they tend to be a particular type of program, or do they cut across all programming types in terms of short form, long form, feature spots?
Most of mine are features or short forms. Excuse me, short films. Um, Most of the time, I am just trying to get the effects just cut down on them, and most of the time at this, the easiest way is I usually just bake them out. And that's, I think, what a lot of colorists have found is the easiest way is if I could just make my conform as easy as possible, I can save a lot of time on both ends, unless they're really wanting to go back to Avid or they really want to do finishing in Avid and they want to go back and do that round trip workflow. I try and see if I can finish it in Resolve. And I know that might seem a little bit lazy, but I try and see, I'm looking at the project to see what are my goals, and if their goal is not to go back to that final application, I basically see if I can finish the whole goal in Resolve. And if their titles are done and everything, I'm just going to bring it into Resolve and I'll probably bake it all in. specifically with
Okay.
the effects. So I want to say that probably 75 to 85% of the time with the AAF, I'm usually going to bake it down and have them render it out of Avid. Or I might just take over the project and bring it into Avid and render it out myself, just to make sure that everything is proper with the codecs. If it needs an alpha channel, or if I need to re-render it out, for instance, I might be able to do that myself.
Right.
Just because I,
Well,
Mhm.
I was just going to say, by having them bake it in, which is a workflow that I've done most of the time for reality TV, just because I'm sure you've seen the same thing. Reality TV tends to throw every effect at the timeline but the kitchen sink, and trying to reconform and recreate all of those effects one by one just was always going to be a nightmare. And so rendering out the whole program as a master, and then getting do you ask for an EDL, or how do you razor up or split up the timelines you get when you have them just give you a single baked file?
That's exactly what I do. So I'll basically ask for essentially the whole kitchen sink. So I'll ask for the AAF, I'll ask for an EDL. I'll also essentially just double check the EDL. You can open up the scene detect and I'll import the EDL, and I'll just sort of eyeball it and compare and just make sure everything sort of fits in there. One of the big reasons that I found, especially with Avid, is I found Avid editors tend to do really, really unique things with the effects that other editors in Final Cut 10 and Premiere, I guess you don't have to do. They do these really cool things that they're forced to do to make it work. And you have to bake those in there. You can't really recreate those, or you don't have to necessarily recreate those in other applications. And sometimes it's just easier to just bake it in there and move along and grade that and call it a day.
Well, I'm glad I talked to you, because I was actually going to jump just right into showing people how to bring in an AAF and link it up. But this is an excellent point, that there are a whole lot of programs where the easiest thing really is to render it out, split it up, and now, as a colorist, you've got the simplest conform in the world. So I'm glad I picked you first,
Well,
because I wasn't thinking about talking about that.
Well, it's great to know. It's a great workflow to understand that you can definitely bring in AAFs and you can run it through. But I think in the actual real world, it's a really difficult workflow. Something always comes up. There's an error that gives a really obtuse, difficult error that's difficult to track down. And sometimes you'll waste your whole time in conform. And at least for what I found, clients just don't, or they're not understanding of the time you're wasting in conform. And it's difficult for them to compute, why are you spending 6 hours trying to track down this effect? I paid for it, my editor did it, what are you doing with this? And
Right,
that's
right.
difficult for them to want to spend extra money on that. So it's just easier, especially if you can get the same quality out of the clip, move it into Resolve and move on, for you to just export it and get into the grading for most of the time.
Well, and it also has the advantage of not requiring the client or the assistant editor or whomever is providing you with the materials that you need. It spares them from having to do any actual prep in the timeline themselves, short of maybe turning off the titles, because obviously you want to work textless if you're going to do that.
Yes, and there's definitely, I mean, just with any workflow, you do have to do some prep and pre-prep especially, but ideally they're going to need a textless version anyway. So ideally, hopefully they've thought about that. And if not, I mean, they're going to have to have flattened the workflow anyway for you to have done any type of round trip anyway. So there's going to be
Right.
some work with any workflow. Ideally,
Okay.
less with this one.
Cool. Well, that's a great perspective. Thank you, Jason, for contributing.
Thanks for bringing me on.
Cool. So I'm gonna do something that I haven't done before, and I'm actually gonna bring someone else into this conversation. Who else? Raise your hand if you regularly actually go through the trouble of importing an AAF into DaVinci Resolve. Um, okay. I'm going to Diego. Are you there,
Hey,
Diego?
Alexis. Yes,
Hello.
I'm here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? It's been a while.
It's been a while. It's been a while, and thank you so much for this time.
Sure. Hey,
It's awesome.
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I just love talking to people about these things.
Yeah,
Uh,
and probably you have people from all around the world.
yeah. Well, I mean, and that's really interesting. Is I knew Jason was from the LA market, and the LA market has their way of doing things from long experience. I'm curious. So you get AAFs from your clients?
Yeah, we actually here in South America, most people use Avid.
Okay.
So that's the reason that I got AAF. Some people use Premiere and they export XML, but I usually have better experience with AAF from Premiere than an XML from Premiere. So I don't know if
Okay.
it's the
Okay.
structure of the AFF that is more complex or so on, but I usually have better experience with AAF.
You know, it's funny you say that because when I have problems with XML, whether from Premiere Pro or from Final Cut Pro 10 these days,
Yeah.
you know, and usually it's some combination of effects or some timeline structure that was never going to work, right? Like nested clips, for instance.
Yeah.
I generally find that switching to exporting an AAF is usually not a bad solution for whatever reason. Again, I've never drilled into this with the engineering team that deeply, because the goal of DaVinci is always to make everything work as well as it possibly can and to fix any problems that they can. But in terms of workarounds, yeah, I have experienced myself using the AAF format as kind of a fallback when I'm having trouble with other things. But in terms of the question was prepping in the feature picture locks. And of course, I chuckled to myself because who gets picture lock anymore, right? I mean, I insist on it for, you know, for all I'm able to. Certainly on my own projects, I'm a huge believer in picture lock because just, you know, I never have any money. And a great way to save money is to lock your picture and commit to what you've done, so everyone else in the workflow can just do what they need to do without constantly going back and reconforming and, oh, now something went wrong and we need to do whatever. And, you know, so I'm still a huge proponent of picture lock when you can get it. But I also fully understand that the reality is, you know, if you've got a big dollar client and they don't want to lock the picture, you know, they don't care that the colorist wants to lock the picture. They're going to make you reconform. So, you know, that aside, since you bring in AAFs, you care passionately about the structure of the timeline. You don't have the luxury of everything just getting rendered to a single track. So what?
I actually make a video for my clients. So saying to them, hey, prepare the timeline in this way so that I don't have problem like importing, you know, because it's really awful that you open an XML or an AAF and then you don't find things and then you start calling the editor and then it's a feedback all time.
Right.
So I actually made a video and I send to the editor and I say, hey, these are the steps, please. It's simple, I mean.
You know, I did the same thing when I was doing more client work. I had a document that was on the web, and I would just send them a link, and I'd say, read this, and do these steps yourself, and then you won't end up paying me to take 3 hours of my life and do them for you. So that was a great way. Like that was how I sold it. Is if you do it, you don't have to pay me to do it. And everybody likes saving money. So generally speaking, that worked.
And the last thing that I did that was funny, I say to the editor, hey, why don't you learn Resolve and send me the DRP project?
Oh, you know what? So we're laughing, but my biggest client these days, that's exactly what he and I do. He's a producer editor, and he's willing to be very technical, and we've had a long relationship, and he has Resolve, and I took a half a day to teach him and his assistant editor how to do everything they need to do in Resolve so that they could do the conform in New York. And if they had any problems, they had all the media right there. And
Yes.
yeah, so
That's
then all he had to do, as I'm sure you do with your clients, is he sends me the media and DRP project file. And
DRP
then,
media management, and that's it.
yeah, that's it, done. And in fact, he's so capable that I just send him a DRP back of the finished grade, and he does the render. I don't even have to do the render. It's the easiest money. I love him. Matt Pulowski, I'm giving him a big shout out. He is a dream client because we've been able to do this workflow. But of course, not everyone's that technically savvy.
Yeah.
So if somebody needs the conform done, it's unkind to force them to do things that they're not technically prepared to do. But I do want to get into what your short list is. First, I'm just going to point out, and if you all knew I was going to do it sooner or later, I do write the DaVinci Resolve manual for people who don't know. This is the 16.2 manual, and part 6 of the manual is all about importing and conforming projects. The very first chapter is information on preparing timelines for import and comparison. And the funny thing is, this is actually an expanded version of the document, an expanded and updated version of the document that I used to give clients. I was like, I've already written this. I'll just use this, to create this chapter. So this is, for those of you who are interested, a nice checklist. And then, of course, there's all the information on how to conform different kinds of files. The AAF section has a lot of different workflows because Media Composer has a lot of features that allow you to do this in subtly different ways. But that little self-serving pitch aside, please read the manual. What are the key things you want your clients to do to make AAF conform, specifically AAF conform, work better for you?
What are the key things? Probably, I always say the same. So everything in one layer, if it's necessary, like two, but everything in one layer.
So you mean move everything onto track V1?
Yes, into
Yeah.
one track, into one track. Then you can keep dissolves, like fade in, fade out, that's it. But other like wipes, special transition, and so on, please, took it away. And then, then duplicate the timeline, make a name of conform, and delete also the audio because I don't need the audio.
Okay.
And what I love is that if they can make a born in with the timecode and with the source name of each clip and the timecode of each clip. So in my reference, if I have a problem with, finding one clip, I can see the reference, the name, and I can see the timecode.
Nice.
So I can conform it really easily. I don't need to to go back to the Premiere or the Avid project. So with the reference, I just know the name of the clip and the timecode.
Okay. No, that's a really nice tip.
Yeah.
That's a really nice tip.
Yeah.
I mean, these days,
share...
I'm lucky if I can get a reference movie that just matches the edit. I tweeted about this the other day because I ran into this. I was tearing my hair out because I thought for sure that the conform had just screwed up. And then I find out, the reference movie was from a different timeline. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's the thing.
I mean, what was nice is it was an easy solution because Resolve had actually done a perfect job. So hooray. But no, getting that information as a window burn, that's fantastic. And that's actually
that's the thing.
When I make offline media for editors on projects where we're doing an offline online workflow, I do the same thing. I go ahead and put a window burn of the file name, the source file name, and the source time code into the offline media. I sneak it down all the way to the bottom for the same reason. Like later on when I'm reconforming that offline to the online, if anything goes wrong for any reason, I immediately know the name of the clip. And oh my God, that saved me hours on some projects. So that is a great tip. In terms of effects, so I know that DaVinci has worked very hard to make a variety of effects work and carry over for AAFs. And in particular, speed effects has been a real area of interest. Once upon a time, it didn't work so well. These days, as far as I can tell, it actually works great. And then other effects, some come in great, others don't. From your practical experience, which effects are you fine with people leaving live in the timeline for import in the Resolve, and which effects do you want them to remove or pre-bake?
In some way, as you say, the speed effects in many cases works. So, it works, but I usually say to them, hey, write a text if you make an effect. If you make an stabilize, please write me a text in the reference.
Okay.
So that shot was stabilized. If you make, I don't know, something, please write it. So because, probably speed effects are the only ones that transfer. I know that with Final X, some effects like color effects transfer and so on. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but there are so many effects that doesn't work.
Right.
So in that case, for me, the reference is really important. So I say to them, hey, please write me a text saying that which effect you did it, stabilize, or I don't know what effect did it.
So what has your experience been with editors prepping their project and sending it out of Media Composer, using the option to render clips with effects as self-contained clips when exporting to AAF? Is that something you recommend people do, or do you prefer they do it the long way on a clip-per-clip basis in the timeline first?
The truth that I don't have that experience saying that to them, like saying like a safe contained clip, but I will prefer to do it in the long way.
Just to have a little more control and be aware of what clips are.
So.
Gotcha. Stills. Talk to me about still images.
What do you mean about the still images?
Do you have them leave still frames in the timeline and import them as is? Or do you have your clients bake those still frames into clips?
That's a good question. I never say that to them.
Okay. So my experience has been stills work well. My experience has been that stills work well.
And also some animations works good. Like zoom, pan, and so on. Some of them works.
Right. But it's a short list. It's a short list of motion graphics parameters that come over.
The basic one.
Yeah. And that short list is, once again, to sell the book. It's in the manual. So there's a nice little chart that tells you. But yeah, so I think we've hit the high points. I'm going to take one more look at the question. They're also this is interesting. They're interested about VFX coming out of After Effects. I don't know how you deal with it, but whenever I deal with After Effects stuff, I just want a rendered movie in a nicely, minimally compressed format, whatever is appropriate for the project at hand.
Yeah. Actually, in so many cases, because the Adobe connection and so on, so they leave that connection. So when you conform, the name doesn't appear of that Adobe connection with After Effects.
Right.
So I usually say to the editors is that in Premiere, there is a button that it says replace VFX. So that button, what it makes is like it broke the connection, but it brings the clip, like like the full clip and replace it in the timeline. So that in conforming, I don't have a clip with a Adobe connection. I have the original clip.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sensible.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's kind
those kinds of deep interoperability things in the Adobe world are great until you leave the Adobe world, and then all of a
definitely.
sudden it's like, oh God, what are all these offline clips in my timeline?
Multicam, compound, nested, all of that things.
Oh God, yeah, no, and that's still a bugaboo is nested clips and compound clips. I know, again, I know that the team is always looking to make those things work better. And I haven't done a round of testing around the last version to see where compound clips are yet. But in general, I keep telling people be aware when there are compound clips, and if you can deconstruct them prior to exporting to Resolve, that's probably for the best.
Yeah.
And then
definitely.
those things are insidious, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, myself, projects I've done the finishing edit for, and prepped and moved into Resolve, have something goes wrong in the middle of moving the grade to another workstation or something. Some clip won't conform. I can't figure out why, and I drill into it and I discover, oh my God, it's a compound clip. I thought I got rid of them all, and there was even one that I missed. They're impossible.
Yeah. That's always happen.
Okay. Well, I think between Jason and you, we've gotten a really good look at this workflow. And I'm just happy to talk to somebody who is successfully bringing AAFs into Resolve. Because it's, you go to forums and there's always someone who's like, I can't make it work and everything's busted and Resolve sucks. And then it always turns out it's some irritating little switch that once it gets flicked, everything's working fine. And so it's good to hear that this workflow is being used and is being taken advantage of. So thanks for giving me hope.
Thanks, gracias.
Thank you. Okay, so next question. And I'm gonna go to Geraldo Alexandre. I am not seeing you there, so I'll go ahead and just answer this question anyway. And I want to bring some new voices in, not just people that I know. So raise your hand if you're a working colorist. Raise your hand if you're a working colorist. I am going to Omair Hyder?
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Welcome to the show.
Oh.
Have we ever met?
No, we have not.
Okay.
But I'm warning you in advance, I have a 2-year-old who will not stop talking behind.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I'm interested in what everyone has to say.
Yeah, no, I know. But I don't know. Okay.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you been grading?
Well, it's been, and before I moved to Resolve, I was using heavily After Effects, and Vegas had some great tools, Sony Vegas. Then I discovered Resolve. That was about, I think, 6-7 years ago.
Okay.
And then when it went to Blackmagic, the first thing I did, I went and bought that dongle. Yeah, it's been quite a few years. I was working out of Southeast Asia, so there are a lot of local small projects, commercials, music videos, and stuff like that.
What part of Southeast Asia? I'm curious.
Pakistan.
Where?
Pakistan.
Pakistan. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Cool. So what kind of programs were you mainly focusing on, or is it a grab bag of a little of everything?
Well, always. What do you mean specifically?
Oh, what do you work on? Features? Do you work on television? Do you work on spots, music
most
videos?
of the broadcast, and most of them were music videos and commercials.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So the question I've got, and this is always a fun discussion, and I have a feeling I'm going to get a variation on this question probably every episode. Is what's the difference between a good and bad colorist? What does it take to be a good one, and does gear influence this? Now, I certainly have my opinions, which I will make known momentarily, but I'm always curious in, fresh voices. In your experience working in post in your neck of the woods, because I'm sure you're in touch with your colleagues and the people that you compete against in your market. What, in your opinion, distinguishes the better colorists in your market?
Already have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in your market, having a level of experience to really understand how to control the signal, and to have the experience to have a variety of solutions quickly to hand because you've run into overexposed shots before and you have your tricks for how to deal with that, and you've run into noisy shots before and you have your tricks. Those are the kinds of things that are distinguishing people in your market.
Yes, primarily, but when you're working with like let's say the A list, it's a different language altogether.
Mm-hmm.
It's about calibration, it's about waveform, it's about a lot of those kind of things. Whereas nowadays, a lot of people are okay just winging it, just maybe just because of cost or something like some other reason.
Okay.
There's just like too much happening at the same time.
Interesting. Right, right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and add to that myself, and then I'm gonna actually bring someone else in. So thank you. That's a great perspective. And certainly I'm not going to argue that knowing your tools is an important thing, and knowing the right tool that gives you the flexibility to do the job doesn't hurt. So thank you for that.
Oh, welcome.
So I'm actually going to bring in Mark Osborne, if you don't mind joining me again.
Oh, okay. I don't want to commandeer your show, though.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, actually, all I need is for you to agree with me this time.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
But I mean, this question means different things to different people, and in general, my feeling is, you absolutely, you have to have a solid understanding of the video signal. You have to have a solid understanding of your tool. If you don't have those things, you're maybe not going to be as fast or controlled as a client might like. But what I wanted to get into, and what I wanted your perspective on, is controlling the room, which I think is not something a lot of junior operators think of when they think, I want to get into, I want to get into being an editor, or I want to get into being a colorist, or I want to get into being a finishing artist. But I think anyone who has been in a variety of situations and worked with clients for, years, starts to twig that half the job, maybe even more of that, is controlling the room and controlling the client's experience and uncontrollable desires. And I think, from my perspective, one of the most valuable things I learned in my very first internship, which was an audio internship, was the lead engineer, Jay Shilladay. I will always remember him because he was such a great mentor. But he let me sit in the room with him and the clients. And when I got done, sweeping the floors and cutting the bagels and striping tapes, and I got to see how he interacted with his clients. And when the clients left, he would talk with me about that. And so I got an early jump start on the importance of client interaction. So what would you add to that?
Basically the same thing. I mean, it's such an overlooked part of the job. I think a lot of colorists coming into the business probably don't get it until they're into it, when they're actually working with, especially bigger, more professional clientele. They have certain demands and certain things they look for in an artist. And I've found in the 22 years I've been grading is that first of all, they like you to command the room. Most of them do. You got to have a command of the room, but it's such a genteel thing. You can't go too overboard. You got to make sure you're still listening to them, but they also don't like someone who's, a little bit too shy or about their opinion, or if they're a little more, what's the word? I don't want to say meek, but some people are a little softer to the touch. And it just depends. Every client's different. Some clients want that, but some clients want more like on the act. Before I took over there was another colorist that was supposed to do it, but that person again was not strong, and they started looking for another colorist. So when I came in, I just do what I normally do. I came in and said, look, here's my plan for your show. Here's what we need to do. And from what I was told by the post people that owned this facility, said that's exactly what that group needed. That showrunner needed someone to take the reins, because they just didn't feel the other person was confident in their decisions. So, and one more quick note about it is you got to watch. It's funny, you got to watch what you say in a room with clients. There's a very famous, financially done movie, a movie that made a lot of money. I did that. I was done with it. I had finished it. I'm not going to name the movie or the client, but I was finished. But we couldn't get the client back in for like literally 2 or 3 months because they were so busy to view the film. And that it was back in the Spirit days when we put film up on the Spirit. And when I put Reel 1 up, for some reason, it had lost the light level that I had set 3 months prior.
Oh no!
Okay, it came in half 50% dark, like using an opacity. So all I did was there's a light level, and I had saved my stills, so I just took shot 1 and matched the light level to shot 1. And once I did that, it was uniformly correct for the rest of the reel, and everything looked great. And then reels 2 through 6 were all fine. The light level, it retained the data for that. So at the end of the session, the director had approved my color, but she asked me one simple question that I kind of just botched the way I answered it. She said, what was the problem at the beginning? Why did that first reel come in wrong? And I kept thinking in my head, what does it matter? You've approved it. You saw that I fixed it. But I sort of hemmed and hawed and had this, I don't know. I haven't been on the job for 3 months, and it just was dark and I fixed it. I had to see how it was just such a it wasn't a strong answer. If I had a solid answer, she would have been confident. But since I hemmed and hawed about it, she walked out, went to the scheduling office and said, I'd like another colorist to take this over. I don't trust Mark.
Wow.
So
wow.
I learned that day how your words you don't have it in the bag just because they've approved color.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned wow, you got to really have an answer. And if you don't have an answer, you say, I'll find someone that does have that answer. You just have to be confident,
Right.
You can lose a client really quick.
Well, and I get it because, at your level, that project represents a huge amount of money.
Yes.
And as I keep hammering to people that I teach or talk to who ask me things like this, the colorist is the last line of defense for a quality image right before it goes out to your customer, right?
Yeah.
Like it literally goes from your suite to the theater. And
yes.
That's harrowing.
Yes.
That's if you're a client and you're shepherding this project and you're taking all this heat and so you're just paranoid anyway, you need somebody to give you the confidence that this is right, this is correct, this is fine, and they can pay the bill and go away with a song in their heart, and they can go in front of audiences, and hopefully you were right about that, and it is fine, and the audiences have a good experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's a great addition. So thank you for that,
Oh,
Mark.
sure. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. So I'd just like one other person to chime in on this question. Does anyone else out there with experience grading with clients have anything they feel like they would add to this conversation? Hey, Joe.
And I found the mute microphone a little bit quicker this time.
Yes. So the last direction I was going to take this into, because the person, Geraldo, did ask, does gear influence this? And, my answer is unequivocally yes. And I'm going to talk primarily about displays and the importance of having a color critical display and being set up in an appropriate environment so that when you turn to your client with the confidence of many years of working with clients and you say, no, this image is great, this is how it will be and this is what the client will see. The only way you can say that is if your suite is set up with appropriate monitoring to what you're doing, and appropriate lighting so that you're able to really clearly and truthfully see what the monitor is presenting you with. So, you know, everyone's trying to cut corners and see, because good monitors are expensive, and you know, it sucks. I hate it, but it's the truth, because what you need is a level of quality and capability, calibration and output that, you know, a TV isn't going to give you all by itself. So do you have anything to add to that? You're a great person to talk to about this.
From an engineering standpoint, I guess is part of where I'm rooted. But we had this discussion last week about, you know, why does my stuff look different? You know, when I'm viewing it in different circumstances, and you know, there are reasons for that as to what even our emotional state is as we're watching something when we're happy, or, you know, somebody prop my eyelids open, I can't watch this anymore, sort of thing. And, you know, it's just, you're not receptive to it. But the big deal is we talked about being able to get that product out and it looks the same for thousands or millions of screens, you know, because that's what we have available to us now, if, you know, as distribution medium. And I was talking about putting those dots in the squares, you know, if you generate red value this, green value that, and blue value the other thing, does it actually make that perfect shade of cream, you know, that was maybe, you know, not necessarily just part of the motive content of the story, and you're always serving that, but is it like the Pantone, if you're doing a commercial, is it the number that is that hue of their product? Is that the exact thing that's going to be shown? And, you know, whatever fantastic, you know, identifiable color somebody's product or logo is it going to be identifiable to anybody who's actually watching that thing back, and they know, oh, well, that's National Geographic yellow for sure. Or,
right,
you know,
right.
Yeah, and you know, when I did this little bit of work for Warner Brothers when they were archiving all of their digital stuff, we had Pantone values for all the characters, you know, as to what red Sylvester's nose was, what yellow Tweety Bird was, what gray blue Bugs Bunny is, all that kind of stuff. And we needed to nail those numbers within 1%. And because these things they're being transferred to original color negative to be stored in a salt mine someplace for future centuries, wanted to film up, and with the grayscale and a couple of test patterns at the front, just a colorist hits the button when they put that thing up on the scanner or whatever device exists in the future, that all those colors would come back.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be Warner Brother colors.
Right.
So
let me ask you this, because I know that you've had your own shop for many, many, many years. You've worked in big shops, but then you moved into your own place and you had your own setup. What did you find was the most important set of things you needed to do to feel that your independent suite, I don't want to call it a home suite, even though it was at home, but it was very much, you know, on its own floor with its own entrance and kind of doctor style, right? But what did you feel was the most important thing you had to do to that environment to make it a professional feeling environment for your clients and for you to do the work?
Well, I did have a downtown studio for a while before I moved it into my residence. But the big deal was controlling the light pollution in the suite, with, you know, opening windows and you know, having you know, comfortable viewing environment. It was really about getting a neutral environment so that we could sort of smell the roses without, you know, a whole bunch of other odors intruding. And that's you know, that's a big deal, is that even my downtown studio was it was a rental apartment that I had, and all the walls were kind of cappuccino, and I couldn't change that. So what I did was I did a surround for the monitor and a backlight and all that kind of stuff, which was as neutral 18% as I could make it. And then I also had a DLP projector in the room. And when that thing was on, like the room lit up because there
Wow.
was just that much bounce. Like it was a 14-foot diagonal screen.
Okay.
And
So
yeah, when you
how
crank
did you
that
control
baby
the
up,
light from
the
that
room
thing?
got pretty bright. Well, it was one of those things. It was seemed to be too bright, and there was too much distraction in the room. Drop it to one bulb.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It would work, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It probably wasn't the best
Well,
environment for that.
but you know, it did work well enough, and the projects when they went to theater, they were acceptable. They were just fine, and
Cool.
at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, one of them was a Joni Mitchell concert video, so
Wow.
that was fun.
So you brought up light control, and I'll just take the opportunity to point out what I do in my home suite for light control. Everyone's been staring at these for the last 2 episodes. But I went to just blinds.com, and they make these cell blinds that are light blocking blinds, theoretically for people that have trouble sleeping. But the key thing for me was getting them with, if you can see, a track. So the blind is slotted and it fits into this track, and that's what really makes these effective for me. It's 100% light blocking, and you know that little seam that you can have with other blinds or other methods of trying to control your window light is gonna kill you. You think, oh, it's just, you know, it's just a little seam on the side, but that seam reflects in your monitor, and it's impossible. So these are really effective, and I love it because when I'm not grading, I don't like sitting in the dark. It is not my favorite thing. And so when I'm not grading, if I'm doing something like, you know, writing or, you know, even if I'm dealing with conforming a project, I can just pull the blinds up and have daylight and have a happy life.
Exactly, and I would just interject here that I actually had 6 of them. And you're right about that little shaft of light, because occasionally, just because seasonally, the windows would warp.
Oh.
And I would get a little crack of light here at the bottom or the side, and then there'd be this dot of white someplace, and you go, "Where is that coming from?"
Yeah.
It's like, and then you're like into lighting director, going, "Where is that coming from?" And you're shading this, and you're dropping that, and you get the gaff tape and stick that down, and you know.
Yeah, you don't want to have to do that. But so these are great. They're not that expensive, and they let you really turn any room with windows into a completely light controlled space. So I can't recommend it enough as a easy pro solution. So okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't go into straight blackout like at the bottom of, you know, like some underground cave or something like that. If you ever experienced that total darkness.
Oh.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, it's no fun. It's no fun. I mean, and I'll say honestly, to veer off on a tangent, my least favorite part of being a colorist is being in the dark all the time. It's my least favorite thing about it. I just don't enjoy that part of it. You know, it's necessary to be in controlled lighting, because obviously you're not in pitch black unless you're grading in a theater. You do have the bias light behind the display, and you may have some very focused work lighting that you know is deliberately tuned not to spill onto your display surfaces. But you know, just being in a subdued environment like that, it's a tough part of the job, I think, and you don't realize it until you've been doing it for a while, and you're like, oh God, you know, I haven't I haven't seen the sun in a month. I go into work and work in the dark, and when I leave, the sun's already down, and if it's in the winter, and yeah, it's tough. How do you deal with that?
Well, for a long, I did a lot of midnight rushes, so working the graveyard anyway.
Oh wow.
But yeah, no, it's great for the complexion, but boy, do you need the SPF when you do get out in the sun.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, okay, cool. Thank you for chiming in.
You're welcome.
It's always a great perspective. So, I am actually gonna switch off to a special request from Twain Richardson. Twain, are you there? Raise your hand if you're there. There you are. Hey, Twain. Twain?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Oh, yes. There you are. Sorry, I should have warned you. I was dragging you onto the show. You're like, where's the microphone? Oh, shit. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
So those of you who don't know, Twain Richardson is an editor and colorist and producer sometimes. Working in Jamaica. And he asked me to share a manually conformed proxy workflow. And I just had to say yes, because that's actually one of my favorite features in DaVinci Resolve, in terms of exercising manual control over an offline-online workflow. And if I'm not mistaken, we discussed this when I was in Jamaica. And you've taken that ball and you've just run with it in your work, which is great to hear, because it's how I work with my clients. Mainly because I insist that my projects be edited in Resolve, because I want to benefit from an easy, move to the color room or the color page.
Yeah.
And this is a good way to do that, to control that. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive in, but feel free to chip in if there's anything you want to add as I'm doing this workflow, Twain.
Okay, I will.
So I'm gonna switch over to Resolve. And I've set up this project. This was the thing I was doing in a mad dash right before the episode began. And what I've done is I basically excerpted a scene from my project, Carry My Heart to the Yellow River. And this scene is all red raw clips, the whole thing. And so I'm just going to go through how I handled the creation of offline media and how I managed it with the editor that I was working at the time. I was working remotely with an editor in New Zealand. So this was an 8K project, by the way, just so you know. So the media is really heavy, even though it's a short film. The final runtime's like 21 minutes. The total media ended up being something like 8 terabytes of media. And it easily could have been more if I was the kind of director who did more takes, but I tend to be very restrained in how I do takes. So here's what I did is I imported all of the online media. I did whatever I needed to do to that media to treat it. So if I needed to sync the audio, I would sync the audio. We were using dual source audio recording with timecode sync and a microphone on the camera as a sanity check. So in this case, I was able to sync all my audio really simply, and all of the microphones were being recorded to the same, as multiple channels to the same piece of media. So the person I talked to on day one about audio syncing got back to me and actually ran into one of Resolve's limitations when it comes to audio syncing, and that is if you're in a situation where you've recorded multiple channels to separate files, separate audio files, Resolve is not, unfortunately, able to sync to all the files for a given piece of video. Resolve has this assumption that one video file is going to match to one audio file, and that's it. That's the only way that it is. So, you know, knowing that, but also working with audio recordists who tend to route all of their microphones to discrete channels of a single recording device, that's never been a problem for me. I just manage it by making sure I provide the right kind of media that Resolve is expecting. So that said, I bring all the media in, I sync it, I do whatever I need to do, and then the way I tend to work is, for this project, I just did one giant timeline. I'll select all of the media that I want to create offline media for. I'll right-click it, and I'll create a new timeline using selected clips. And I'm going to call this string out. And so now I've got this string out timeline that's just every single clip. And it's the entirety of every single clip. Now, I could do what I'm about to do using media management, but I prefer this more old school way of creating offline media, which is to render it out in the deliver page, mainly because it allows me to do more stuff on this particular timeline if I so desire. So for instance, one of the things that I like doing is I like using Resolve color management. And so if I open this project up, I go in the color management, I switch this to DaVinci YRGB color managed. What I will do is I like to render my dailies or my offline media using the source camera color space. Even if I'm rendering to something like ProRes Proxy, which is really light, and you're going to say, Alexis, you're insane. There's no way those files are going to look good. But the way I set that up is I basically, well, you know what? I'm going to do this a little more easily. I'm going to go down into my red color settings. And what I want is red wide gamut RGB and log 3 G10, because this is red media. And then to make sure that I bake that log encoding into my dailies, I go to output color space and I choose exactly the same thing. Red wide gamut RGB log 3G10. And then I save. And now everything looks log, dull and log, as you would expect. And the reason I do this is because I am a fan of working with editors who know enough about color to do little touch-ups to make a scene work better during the edit. And if they're going to do that and they have the experience, or more likely I'm also working with the editor and I'll go ahead and touch up a scene if I want to see it play with slightly better color. I want to do that against the original camera color space, because then those adjustments are going to carry over into my online, where I'm using Resolve color management and I'm working in that timeline color space. So baking that working color space into the dailies, I've found is a real convenience. And no, you don't have the latitude of the source raw media at all. but you have enough latitude for the kinds of little tiny scene balancing tweaks that you might want to make to have a cut play a little smoother. So anyway, I set that up. I also mentioned earlier where I like, yeah.
If I may, speaking of baking in, I like to do data burn-ins as well. Bake those into the proxies.
You stole my thunder. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, it's a good way, it's a good visual way for me to identify where if online doesn't go properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a huge thing. And that's, you know, happily really easy to do. You just go into your workspace menu and choose data burn in. And I'm gonna do this in a really ham-handed fashion. I usually make it a little nicer. But, you know, I'm going to turn on source time code, and I'm going to turn on, where is it? Source file name. And are these not showing up because I'm on the...
Yeah,
there we go. There we go. There we go.
Yeah,
I didn't have it selected. So these, of course, are huge. Now, I just want the source clip name. I don't want the file name because that has the path. So there we go. I've got those two things. Now, what I tend to do, or at least what I did on that one project, and it worked out well, is I don't want these big, ugly things just sticking in the middle of the picture. But what you can do is you can actually make these smaller. And so I make them as small as I can and still be legible given the resolution that I want to edit at. And then you can also move these individual windows around. So usually what I do is I try to just stick them down in the bottom. I don't, if they get clipped off because of a resize or whatever, I don't mind. I just want them there so if something goes wrong, I know to kind of pan down there and I've got the information I need. I don't know how you set yours up, Twain. How do you set yours up? Twain, you still there? Oh.
Yeah, I'm still here.
There you go.
I accidentally put my computer in sleep mode.
Oh,
that's pretty much how I set mine up as well. But also what I do is that I save it as a preset. So that way I don't have to be doing it over and over. I just call up the preset whenever I need to make the fixes.
Actually, you know what? I do that too. Look, there's my Ganan preset. Let me just see what that is. That was for a completely different purpose, and I just lost what I did. Should have saved it. That's okay. Let's say this is what I want. Just for giggles. I'm just going to leave that there. So you can set up your burn-in, and that burn-in will be rendered into all of your media. Now, to do that, you want to go into advanced settings, and you can either just have the data burn-in be same as project, or you can choose one of your presets specifically. And it's not going to show up, which is a little disconcerting, but it will be rendered out. The other thing I do, again, my goal is to create a set of dailies that, in as many ways as possible, is identical to the source media. So in resolution, actually, first off, I need to make sure I'm rendering as individual clips. And then in resolution, I can choose render at source resolution. So now the frame size of the output is going to be identical to the source. And again, this is important to me because if the editors do any kind of reframing or resizing or pan and scan, I want all of those things to match the source media. So when I relink to the source or reconform to the source, that all the calculations will be identical. And we did that on my short, and it was perfect. It was magic. It was really, really nice. So then if you have audio, you're going to set up your audio however you need it to be. And in file, of course, this is really important. You want to make sure that you choose source name. So all of this set up, all I really need to do is find a location for this. And I'm going to scroll down and create a folder called, actually, I'm not going to put it in there. I'm going to put it here. I call that offline Yellow River offline. Create, open. And so now at this point, I just let this rip, and I'm hoping that this doesn't take too terribly long. So I'm going to add this job to the render queue, and I'm going to start render. It's implicit when you render individual clips. Each clip renders with a clone of the source timecode. So there's no setting to choose to set that up. It just is that way whenever you render individual clips. And I click Start Render. And now this is going to rip through every piece of media. Thankfully, it's going quickly. And so while this is going, Twain, how often do you use this workflow in your projects?
I use it on every single project.
Really?
Yes.
So you don't use optimized media at all for editing?
No. My reason is I like, so for instance, if I need to do any form of editing on my laptop, I can easily move the proxy files versus moving the optimized media.
Yes.
That also is that when you create a optimized media, it doesn't actually have the burn-ins, or I haven't found a way to add the burn-ins to the optimized media. So
no, there's no way of doing that because optimized media really serves a completely different purpose.
Yeah.
Optimized media is there for workflows where you're working on one machine and you've got some really heavy media format like R3D that you've got to deal with, and you don't want to deal with the performance hit of just working with the raw, but you don't want to go through all of the steps that we're going through to do this workflow. So, you know, it's easier in that you just select your clips, you optimize them, and then you're done. But as you say, it's not a portable workflow.
Yeah, which is why I opt for creating the proxies.
And I can tell that this is going to take way too long. However, it just so happens, I don't know why I didn't think about it now. I mean, it's good for people to see how the media gets rendered out. But I'm going to go ahead and stop this because, you know, come to think of it, I've already done this. I have a whole folder full of optimized or full of offline media for the whole darn project. So let me see if I can just go ahead and bring that stuff in. So I'm going to jump back to the edit page. So here we've got my timeline. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the data burn-in. I'm just going to turn all that off. So what I've already done is I've created an offline media bin. This is my online media bin This is my offline media bin. I'll move the string out back up to the top level so it's there with my timelines. So I'm going to bring in the offline rendered media that I've created, which I happen to know is in here. And I always keep my offline media in its own folder in the structure of my project organization. So this offline media I generated, there's another setting I probably should have shown you that allows you to create your offline media using exactly the same folder hierarchy as the source media. So the source media was actually set up to be source media, a unit, drone, and then inside of a unit, each day had its media. And then inside that, there's a folder for audio and a folder for video. And what's really cool about this function, I'm going to go back to the deliver page just to point this out. Preserve source directory levels. What's cool about that is you end up with offline media that's organized exactly the same way as your online media, which is really cool for a variety of troubleshooting purposes. So going back to the media page, what I'm going to do just for expediency is I'm going to drag all the A unit into this offline media folder. And what that's going to do is it's going to drill down through all the subfolders and ferret out each individual media file and dump it inside of this offline media folder, just like that. Boom. So you can see if I load these clips, there are the window burns and they are set up using the red, oh God, let me just sum that forth. The red wide gamut RGB log 3G10 profile. So you can see that that's already set up. Now I'm going to turn my output color space back to Rec 709 gamma 2.4. Now these are transcoded clips. So these clips are not going to be recognized as using that red color space until I select them and tag them, which I can do if I have color management enabled. So I right click and then I've got to find the input color space, and then I scroll down and there it is, red wide gamut RGB log 3G10. And now each one of these clips is instantaneously showing me the in-camera normalized 709 look. And yes, the highlights are blown out, but by and large, this is a way nicer editorial experience than editing all that log stuff. And that's the other reason I like this workflow is I've got media that the editing team can actually grade, but then at the same time, it's set up so that with one click, they're looking at a very reasonable image to edit, and I don't have to go grade the dailies because I'm lazy and I don't want to do that. Now, I can grade the dailies if I want to set a look and just rip it across to all the clips in a given scene. That's an easy enough thing to do, and that look will then also apply to the final grade because I set up the color management correctly. So all those offline clips are using the exact same color space as the online clips. So any grade I create for the offline clips will work for the online clips and be my starting point. So there's a lot of efficiencies here that you can mine. So I've got my online media and I've got my offline media organized in separate folders. I'm going to create another bin called timelines to put my demo timeline into. And so here's how you switch your project or your timeline, your edited timeline in between these two sets of media. Is first, I want to make sure I'm looking at the right timeline. So this is the actual edit. First, you want to select all of your clips and you want to right click them and you want to turn conform lock enabled off. When you turn conform lock enabled off, the first thing you're going to notice is all these exclamation points appearing. And those are appearing because now in the media pool, there are two sets of media that have clips that match the clips on this timeline. Resolve was really designed from the ground up to be a conforming machine. Resolve has so many conforming tools. This is just one of many conforming tools that Resolve makes available to you. And one of the built-in conveniences is whenever you disable conform lock enabled, Resolve is constantly looking to see, okay, you've disabled conform lock. Are there any other clips that will match this one? And it looks in the media pool, and if it finds anything in the media pool that doubles up, then it gives you this exclamation point. If I scroll in or zoom in there and I double click that, I can now see which clips Resolve feels are a match for this one. And you can see that one of these is an R3D clip and one of these is a ProRes proxy clip. So Resolve's already trying to set me up for reconforming if I just had one or two clips that I wanted to reconform. For example, VFX clips. However, I want to do the whole timeline all at once. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into my timelines folder or my timelines bin. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to choose Reconform from Bins. Now this is only going to work if you've turned conform lock off in the timeline. If you haven't, you're going to get an error that you can't use this command. What conform lock is doing, just so you know, is it's basically telling Resolve, no, the clip that this is conformed to, the media that this is conformed to is correct, so you can stop looking. Don't keep looking, this is good. When you turn that off, you're telling Resolve, okay, I'm gonna reconform this, but I'm not sure to what yet. So now I right-click, Timelines, Reconform from Bins, and now I get this Reconform from Bins dialog. This is a function that's been made considerably more powerful over the years. Now you have the ability to choose the criteria you're using for reconform. Now, by default, it's just using timecode, but I usually turn on file name and loose file name match because I don't want to use the file extension in the file name because I'm changing file types. So when I select loose file name match, what I'm doing is I'm telling Resolve, just look at the beginning of the file name. Don't worry about the file extension. And
Alexis,
yeah.
if I may jump in here, I've found that whenever I have any speed ramps in my timeline, if I turn on total duration, it actually conforms back to those clips.
Yes.
Without issues.
So total duration is a great oh shit function. You know, when you've got some kind of media and it just will not conform for some reason, it's just making you crazy, you can turn off timecode and turn off file name and just use total duration. And the truth is, most media in a project, unless you've got rendered media that was artificially created to identical durations, But if you just got a bunch of clips that were shot out in the field, chances are each one of those clips is a slightly different duration. What are the chances that the camera operator hit the stop recording button, you know, at the exact same frame of more than one clip? They're reasonably low. So this is a completely wonderful solution for situations where, for whatever reason, the name is giving you problem and the time code wasn't generated correctly, and you know, you don't have any other criteria to really go by to force Resolve to choose the correct media. Total duration can be a lifesaver. So that's a great thing to point out, Twain. So, but in this case, I should be fine because I think I did everything correctly. So I want to use timecode and file name because that's the easiest thing. I'm going to uncheck master. Now I get to choose which bin I reconform from specifically. And in this case, I'm going to choose the offline, or I'm sorry, I'm going to choose the offline media bin because I'm conforming from the online media to the offline media. And I have this new option that lets me set clips to conform lock enabled after they've been successfully conformed. So I'm going to turn that on. And I'm going to click OK. And just like that, I've got a reconformed timeline. Now, how can I tell that this has been reconformed? Well, the easiest thing to do is to jump into the color page. And if you double click underneath the thumbnails, you can toggle between the codec, the file name, and the version name if you've got versions. So right here, I know right away, great, these are all ProRes proxy. It worked. Success. I can see in the thumbnail, there's the little burn-in. Why aren't I seeing the burn-in here? Because I'm actually doing my 239 crop as a function of this being a DCI scope frame size. But if I go into tilting up, you can see, there's my emergency information. So in this project, that stuff's always going to be cropped out. So honestly, for test viewings, no one's ever going to see it unless for some reason there's a need to pan all the way up to the very edge, because that's what you need to do creatively. But this didn't actually come up at all in this project. All of those window burns ended up being hidden for the duration of the project. And that's, as they say, that. Now, after all this editing is finished and I want to go back to the online media, all I do is the same thing. I select all the clips. I can even do just Command A, right click, turn conform lock enabled off, right click that timeline, go to timelines, reconform from bins, and I just do the reverse. I turn on online media, and then I click OK, and just like that, I switch back. And as you say, Twain, that offline media, if I right click any of those clips and choose reveal in media storage, you can see that that's an easy folder of media on a hard drive that I can copy and send to another editor across town or in another country. And this workflow enables the remote editor and me to go back and forth completely easily with total control. And it's a really solid workflow. It's not as drop dead simple as, if I scroll down here, selecting clips and choosing generate optimized media. But that optimized media is not portable in this way. And so for a portable proxy workflow, this is great. You just have to commit to rendering your dailies. But the truth is, you know, you need to sit there and watch all those optimized media clips be rendered too. So it's not like it takes any longer than generating optimized media. It's just an extra couple of steps to switch your edit from one set of media to the other.
Yeah, and as I said, once you set up presets, it's fairly much easier and faster.
Yeah, I show this to a lot of people, and usually people's first reaction is, really? I got to do all this stuff? And it only seems that way when I talk through it, you know, initially. When you know Resolve better and you've got your presets set up, if you're going to, you know, go the extra mile and actually do window burns and these extra bits of convenience, you whip through this workflow real quick. And reconforming back and forth is 2 clicks, really. Nah, 3. 3 clicks. It's not a big deal. But the most important thing is you have such control over what's happening in the timeline. You're no longer the victim of some automatic function or media being put someplace you don't know where it is. You know, in this workflow, you know where everything is, and you know how it works, and you know what you've done. So yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, Twain. Is there anything you would add?
The only thing I would add is on the edit page, instead of jumping to the color page to see that the files actually switched over, is to just hit the metadata tab, and that usually is one thing that. So,
you know what? I always forget about the metadata tab. I don't know why. I shouldn't, but you're absolutely right. If you jump this up into shot and scene, well, you don't even have to do that. You can see right up here. Yeah.
And then if you go to the timeline and turn on selection follows playhead, now you can just use your keyboard, your up and down arrows to just quickly go through the timeline, you know, and see which clips were conformed to the red files or whatever online files that you have.
Right. Right. And by the way, it's worth saying that this workflow also preserves your description, comments, keywords, people, clip color, and all that metadata. So you can populate all that and use it. In fact, that's something that I did for my editor, is once I generated the offline media and I got everything set up, I went through and I was basically my own assistant editor in terms of keywording the clips for her and choosing colors and making sure everything was as organized as I could make it, so that she could hit the ground running as fast as possible. She still had to watch all of the clips, but at least she knew what was what and things were identified well. And all of that reconforms as well, which is really nice. So hey, it's 5:39. We've reached the end of our time together. Thanks for bringing this up, because you can't grade if you don't have a good conform. And there's so many people coming into editing in Resolve, and I think this is a workflow that everybody should know about. So thanks for helping me demo it.
You are welcome.
And so that is us today. Thanks for joining me. And all of the questions that got asked this week are flowing into next week, so I will get to them. And in fact, it looks like next week is going to be ACES time. I've got a whole bunch of ACES questions, and I am going to set myself up to be able to go through them. So if you asked an ACES question, never fear, I will get to it. And next week's looking like it's the week. So cheers. Thanks for joining me.